You're listening to Black Music Scene. A show where we explore the incredible journeys, challenges, and triumphs of Black orchestral musicians who've dedicated their lives to the craft, breaking barriers and defining what it means to be a virtuoso. We are here to celebrate and archive the awe-inspiring stories of our living legends in Black classical music. In today's episode, we're talking with the Uptown String Quartet, a group that was formed in the 80s and guided by the legendary American drummer and composer Max Roach. The group started as a double quartet that played with Max's band, and later became a group that consisted of violinists Diane, Monroe, and Lesa Terry, Max's daughter, Violist Maxine Roach, and their late colleague, cellist Eileen Folson. This all-Black, all-women string quartet has pushed boundaries and redefined what it means to be virtuosi since the mid-'80s. From their roots in Harlem to stages across the globe, the Uptown String Quartet was one of the first groups to notably bridge African-American sounds like blues, swing, jazz, funk, and improvisation with string quartets. From playing jazz venues like the Blue Note to performing on notable programs like The Cosby Show and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, we're going to explore the quartet's rich history, their memorable moments, and the unique stories that have shaped them as artists and trailblazers in the music world. Taking the reins for this episode are Black Orchestral Network leaders Deja Wilson.
This is Deja Wilson.
And Lexi Lagan Holloway.
I'm Lexi Lagan Holloway.
This is Black Music Scene, cultivating community, lifting our voices, and telling our stories.
Hi, my name is Diane Monroe. I play the violin. I'm from Philadelphia, and my parents are Marguerite and Henry Monroe.
Hello, I'm Lesa Terry, a violinist, born in Pasadena, California, and the daughter of Charles and Nellie Terry.
Maxine Roach here. I'm a violist, born in Brooklyn. My mother is Mildred Roach, and Max Roach was my father.
Can y'all share some of your earliest musical memories and what drew you to playing and made you stick with the instruments that you play today?
I'll go first. This is Maxine. In my last year of elementary school in New York City, they gave us a music test. And I decided I like to play the violin. Went into 7th grade. I wanted to play the violin, and the teacher looked at me and he says, well, and I was always a big girl. Why don't you try the viola? I had never heard of the viola. So I said, okay. And it was really a good decision because he was a wonderful teacher all through junior high school. I went to a Black school in the Black neighborhood, and my last year in junior high school, he was transferring to one of the best high schools in New York City, which was nowhere near my home. But he took me aside and he said, Maxine, I'm leaving. I'm going to Midwood High School and I'm taking your papers from the principal's office, your records. Just show up. Don't say anything. Just show up. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would be playing the viola today. Emmanuel Hirsch was his name. The school was on triple session, too, at that time. And orchestra was the first session, so I had to be on the bus at 7 o'clock in the morning. So as the string quartet knows, I am very, very anal about time. I have been all my life. I have been trained that way.
One of my earliest memories of the violin came really from my mother. Her mother actually was a violinist. So it's sort of, I think, in my blood in some way. My mother had studied for a short period just to learn to play the instrument, just as a novice. And she had it in the closet. She had this instrument in her closet. And one day she was cleaning out the closet and out came the violin. And I said, "Ooh, what's that?" And from that second, this violin and I bonded like it was meant to be in my arms for life. So it became much more than just an instrument that I could learn to play. It became my best friend, which has guided me in really profound ways and been the constant in my life when other things weren't. It's real. It's real to me.
It was a bit of fate to come around to the violin. My first instrument was the piano, and my first memories were, I think I was 3 years old, and my uncle taught me how to play Blue Monk on the piano with one finger. And this was, related to the fact that both my mother and uncle were raised in Harlem, and they were Harlem Renaissance babies. And they danced to the music of Duke Ellington's band and Count Basie's orchestra and all of that. And so that's where that came from. Prior to that, I think I subliminally heard my grandfather's sound. We all lived together. He died when I was 2. And I didn't realize until later that I had a string legacy in my family. My grandfather was a virtuoso guitarist, and he played with 4 other brothers for rent parties in Harlem. On my grandmother's side, there was her nephew, Howard Carroll, was the guitarist for the Dixie Hummingbirds, which was a very well-known gospel group. And so somehow this string thing was a connection, and I didn't know it, but when I went in school and I picked the violin, which my mother didn't want me to do, she wanted me to bring home anything but the violin, but I brought home the violin, and she said, "Oh, okay, all right, let's deal with this." And I started practicing, and she said, "Wow." She said, "Okay, I think this is something special." And then fast forward to getting a guitar when I was 12, my grandmother started crying when I started trying to pick something. She started crying and said, "Why? You're crying, Mama?" And she said, "You sound just like Papa." So the string thing is a connection, and I had no idea, and it was just wonderful that held me together, really, and it was no question that I was going to play.
It's incredible how a key figure in your life changes the trajectory of what you're going to do. So Miss Roach, you have this amazing teacher. Miss Terry, you have this incredible matriarchal line of violinists. And then, of course, Miss Monroe, your parents were surrounded by Harlem Renaissance music during the height of the Renaissance. And you have these folks in your life who are fabulous musicians. So it's just so incredible how you had these folks who were here to support you and support your musical journey. So I'm curious, in the formation of the quartet, how did the 4 of you meet? And how did this thing called the Uptown String Quartet form?
I guess that's my question, right? I got a full scholarship to Oberlin Conservatory. My parents were divorced when I was little. And I remember when I got the scholarship, with the help and the support from my teacher, she said, call your father. So I called him, and he was very, very proud. And, I go to Oberlin, and he comes out to Oberlin. Junior year, he came out. We're walking, I remember this, we're walking on campus. And he says, I was talking to your grandmother, and you know what she said to me? And I said, right. She said, well, Max, you played with Miles Davis and Charlie Parker and Duke Ellington. When are you going to play with your daughter? So it was like, oh. So my father was the creator of the Uptown String Quartet. He named it, and he picked that name because when he was young, he, along with his fellow musicians, contemporary musicians, created the music Uptown in Harlem. And this was like another beginning, another renaissance when he named us the Uptown String Quartet. He also commissioned all the music from, musicians that he knew and composers that he knew. But he also challenged us to do it too. And so we had to. And that's how we started.
And sort of follow-up question, Miss Terry, Miss Monroe, what was it like getting that invitation to start this amazing quartet?
I was introduced to the quartet and to Maxine and Max Roach through my sister. I come from a very musical family as well. I have a sister who recently passed, who was friends with Maxine, Zella Terry, and also for a short period played with the double quartet. And she was living in New York City, and when they were looking for other violinists to play, my sister recommended me. And at the time, I was living in Atlanta, playing in the Atlanta Symphony. And so I get this call from Max Roach, and I'm like, what? How did that happen? What? I was stunned and shocked. And I have to admit, I knew he was a jazz musician, but I didn't know to what extent, because I really wasn't in the world of jazz in a big way. But I certainly learned, and he invited me to come to New York and play with the double quartet at the Blue Note. And so that was my introduction to this whole new world of incredible music making and like-minded individuals and wanting to construct something new.
After I had met Maxine, I came back to Philadelphia, and then I moved to New York in 81, and the double quartet had already played one concert in 1980 as a group with Gail Dixon at the time, who has recently passed, at first violin, and Cecilia Hobbs was second violin, and Maxine, of course, was on viola, and Akua Dixon, Gail Dixon's sister, was on cello. And so in 1981, Maxine called me up. We had been talking, and she said, well, we have this performance with the double quartet at Avery Fisher Hall for the Cool Jazz Festival. And she said, would you like to be a part? And I said, what? Are you joking? Of course. Oh my God. I went nuts, and so I was the second violinist in that group. Now, the rest of the personnel, of course, was Cecil Bridgewater, the trumpeter, and at the time, the bassist was Cecil McBee. And that was really a kickoff concert, in New York for the double quartet. And I was so thrilled. I cried, actually, I have to admit. I wept because I knew his sound. I knew Max Roach's sound so well from my parents playing him in the basement all the time. And to just be on stage with such a master and then get all the feeling from his abilities of chamber music and just ability to relate to us. It was a monumental experience.
My father put the string quartet together to play with the double quartet, and he even staged it. There had to be 4 black women for his 4 black men in his quartet. And he had the string quartet in the middle and the guys like a half moon around us. He was directly behind us. I mean, sitting there, it was just the most amazing thing. And to have him not only play, but also quote what we're doing or quote what the horns are doing at the same time was just amazing.
One of the first concerts we ever played as a string quartet only at University of Michigan. We were wet behind the ears and coming in and not knowing what to expect. This is a classical series, and it was a classical venue. And so we didn't know what to expect. So Eileen Folson, our late cellist, that was her alma mater. And so through her, we kind of got that concert in. So we walked into the hall, and we all literally just gasped because it was packed, jammed. It was so full. It was about 500-seat hall, and people were sitting even on the floor on the sides of the hall and everything. It was like unbelievable. And there were all of these black students there, and it was mind-boggling. And this was a classical series, yeah. And this was in the 80s, you know what I mean? So at that time, Max Roach Presents the Uptown String Quartet album was out, and there were mostly spirituals represented on the album, and we played those, and we were just amazed at the reception. People were crying, and students were saying that, especially music students were saying that we never saw any black women playing, especially together and everything. And so it was a beautiful experience.
I want to add to that, Diane, with the idea of our repertoire and the presence of spirituals, on that, especially on the first album. I remember, when we recorded that album, and we were invited to sort of a little party afterwards, a gathering of people in the studio, and we were asked to play. I think we played "Let Us Break Bread Together on Our Knees," and who was sitting there but Marian Anderson? And when I saw her, I immediately had a reaction because it was my mother, my white mother, who taught me about spirituals, played them constantly at home. And of course, knowing who she was, and she's sitting there listening to the string quartet. And I even heard her say, she leaned over to the person sitting next to her and said, "That's a Negro spiritual. I used to sing that song," or something like that. And to see her sitting there listening to us and in a way passing the baton in a certain kind of way held so much joy for us in being able to receive that baton as well and carry it forward in our own unique way within the string quartet.
While Diane was talking, I was thinking about our rehearsals. This was a really big step for the Uptown String Quartet. And we were trained classically. And I remember during the rehearsals, we'd break out and say, yeah, remember that song? Like from James Brown or from Diane Ross. And we start singing and stuff and trying to imitate what we did in the string quartet. And I think that I could never have gotten that at Oberlin Conservatory. It's like, I want a full scholarship, welcome, and leave your culture at home. Thank you very much. I mean, that's what it is. So it was wonderful to sit and as we rehearsed to laugh and say, oh, you remember this? And yeah, yeah, girl. And, and talk about all this stuff and bring the spirit to the string quartet.
The way that we came together on stage, too, there was nothing typical about that either. We had little cues. There was something, if someone played a solo or played a phrase in a particularly really down-home, bluesy kind of way, we had this coded thing we do, which I won't show you maybe, to say to each other, girl, you toe that up. And we would always crack up when we'd see one of us do it. And it was usually Eileen that would.
Oh, Eileen started it.
Oh, that's right. She did start it.
Eileen started it.
Based on a joke based on a situation I had explained to her once about something. Anyway, but yeah, it was a little provocative. Can I say it that way? So she came up with this way of cueing that especially when we needed a little extra push toward really finding ourselves in a situation where we may have felt tense or a little bit nervous. She would do that and we would just crack up, and it would take us right back to the center of why we're together as 4 Black women doing this music and playing our music and owning it, that no one can define that for us or give us a feeling of having to prove anything. We had it. It was in us. So let it come forth and stand in it confidently.
I really love how you all have a really strong understanding of your identity as musicians and how you're feeling the music in your body and responding to that and not trying to silence it like you were mentioning. I also love how there's so much community building in your identity as this quartet. So can you tell us a bit, if you don't mind, can you share some more fond memories of Eileen and what she was like and how you would like for her to be remembered?
Eileen was quiet. She was extremely intelligent, very smart. She had a great sense of humor, very talented. I mean, she really knew that cello. She reminded me very much of Oscar Pettiford. He was a great jazz bassist, but he played the cello. But the difference is that he tuned it in fourths, like the bass. But Eileen improvised in fifths, which is even harder.
Eileen's playing, when she improvised, there were no affectations, in the sound. There's so many string players that play jazz who don't sound like jazz players, like, quote, jazz players. They sound like European players trying to sound like jazz players. And she broke the mold. I mean, she sounded like, she sounded like a horn. She could sound like a horn. She could sound like a voice. And many string players who came over to our side, so to speak, have emulated her.
Eileen also had a uncanny ability to not play just chord changes. I mean, she could, especially when she'd walk. But when she soloed, she played ideas. And often those ideas were extraordinary in her ability to extend that idea beyond just playing it once. She could hear in that way. So she was away from the chordal structure and in her sense of creativity that allowed her to take those risks and go for it. I don't ever remember her messing up or stumbling or anything. She was solid in that, and it's a beautiful thing when you're able to reach that level of creativity, that you're away from the chordal structure and can be free. And she was free.
I, do want to talk about just being women in music. How did politics influence presentation, performing, and also like the way that y'all dressed as well? How did that play into y'all's femininity in music and as a group?
I'll say when we played for kids, when we had, residencies, we go play for elementary through high school, as soon as we walked out, we had everybody's attention because we were 4 Black women with string instruments. And that was like, in those days, it was like, wow. And so it was different from when you hear, just a regular like white string quartet talk, because you hear some of them talk about, well, they don't really pay attention and you don't know what to do. Like the kids are not really interested, but we were Black women. And we walked out there and we had them already. And I think we would have had them regardless of what we wore in that kind of situation. On stage, we were casual, weren't we? We're kind of elegantly casual, right?
A little Afrocentric sometimes.
Times, yeah. It wasn't like Black all the time. And
the fact that we were 4 Black women was in and of itself a political statement, It really was, and it carried it through because in the 80s and 90s it just wasn't happening. It hadn't happened before. When we did the 11 years at the Blue Note with Max, one of the years, which was I think the second year that we played the Blue Note, Columbia Artist Management came down, heard the double quartet, and immediately wanted to employ the women, to book the women. So that's how it came about, really, that we went on our own. And Max rallied for us to be in the classical venue. There were lots of managements at the time, and still are, who have the classical entity and then the jazz on the side. But we were ushered into that classical world, and it made complete sense. And also it changed the face of, at least for the time, it changed the face of the classical series process and the progress of how it looked on stage. At the time, Kronos Quartet had been playing for a while, which is not a jazz quartet, but they were a different quartet. And that was the only different quartet that really was allowed to be in that arena, really, as a string quartet, to break that traditional value.
I remember when their manager came down to the Blue Note and we played Extensions, which is the arrangement of one of my father's drum solos. And the manager came up and wanted to record that with the Kronos before we even recorded. Remember that? They wanted to take that.
Oh, yeah,
I was like, what?
No,
No.
I'm not going to do that.
I mean, the nerve. And when he said that, it took me back to the antebellum days. Like, what?
Mm.
What?
And Max also helped from a political position to place us in an arena that allowed the music that we were playing to be equal with that of the European classical world. He refused to have us placed in the classical music section as opposed to the jazz section because he wanted Uptown String Quartet to have the distinction of being recognized as a classical form. And I remember thinking at the time, well, what about all our jazz folks? They're not going to know where to find us. But the brilliance of Max to push against that at that time, to me, helped me understand as well, and all of us, how to reframe the way we categorize these things, that we don't need to stick it in these convenient little compartments and limit it to that only, but rather recognize it as a larger form that's connected to the bigger sense of what is truly classical. So he was relentless in that regard, and I'm sure I remember Maxine saying too that he did that with his own music and his own understanding of what he was creating.
The fact that we went from venue to venue in these series across the country really developed my self-esteem so incredibly, because I mean, I had been playing, in venues. I played recitals in, Town Hall and Merkin Hall in New York and all these places, and I had been to Marlboro Music Festival and played and with all these classical entities, and on these stages, I was scared to death. Every note was a fear, seriously, because I didn't think that I had a connection to this music, let alone the fact that the violin is also an African instrument, as well as origins all around the world. Africa being the continent that has probably about 25 origins of the violin within each country. But I didn't know that. So here I am playing the violin on stage with Europeans always, most of the time. And I didn't know that it was a part of me. I didn't know it was a part of my culture at all, And suddenly I am in my own culture. And just like my, Russian friends, or my Hungarian friends, or my Romanian friends that relate to their culture when they're playing their instrument. I, for the first time, was relating to my culture when I was playing my instrument, and I got it, and it enhanced not only my esteem, but it enhanced my playing. My playing changed completely, let alone the improvising part once we got into that, But the mere sitting on that stage and having white faces look at you, and having yourself and your identity just being challenged, and feeling, whatever you feel, whatever your background, whatever my background was, to have to be inferior or to feel oppressed, that was all of that comes at you. You know what I mean? So that fear was being healed. I was being healed by that process.
Ain't nobody play Amazing Grace like Diane Monroe. We had a reunion concert almost a year ago in South Oregon, and she literally brought down that house. She brought them to their knees because she had the ability, Diane had the power to stand up and be her authentic self. I have never seen an audience react like they did to her playing Amazing Grace. It was stunning. It was powerful, and it brought everybody to a place of real strength and the courage to stand in your authentic truth. She played it like straight out of somewhere in the South, but it was so beautiful, and it was so poignant, and it was so healing to see this predominantly white audience, if not almost all white audience, come together and surround themselves around the central idea of how we connect, how we come together, all of us different. But to be in that space and honor it from her unique perspective. I just had to tell you that, sister friend, because people are still talking about that concert and what you did, how you transformed the room, literally. And I think we all have the power to do that. Every last one of us, as Black musicians and string players, and even an oboist, we have the power to do that. But do we hold it? Do we go forward with it? Do we keep it central in our lives, in our thinking, as we walk into places, maybe freaked out, scared of what is there, but can we hold it? And so at this point, I think that's the message we can continue to bring forward. And it is possible, and it does change things, as we're seeing in our political climate as well.
I love hearing how you all transgressed all of these different boundaries, how you're thinking outside of genre conventions, which can be really restrictive, especially thinking about marketing and sales. I'm wondering, what tools as Black women specifically did you develop to navigate the music industry? And were there also some other Black women in these spaces that helped you thrive?
When I was in school, I had some violin teachers that were pretty brutal and very racist in their understanding of what they wanted to give me and even accepting me under them for study. And I fought against it, but I realized yesterday I didn't have the skills to manage it. I didn't know what to do because at that time there were no safeguards put in place to be able to manage that. So the understanding of what to do now has come in the years we've spent together playing, both individually and collectively. We've developed those skills so that now when I recognize a young Black player that's being marginalized, I know what to say to them. And it's a conversation. Come on, let's go have a cup of coffee and sit down and talk about this. And develop that close kind of relationship that goes beyond just being a teacher or a mentor, but a person who truly cares about who you are and the situation you find yourself in, and finding the strength and the encouragement to lift yourself up and believe in yourself to go forward and push against whatever kind of oppression may be hitting you. That is, to me, at this point, my most important work individually, is to be able to be present to those that don't know how to do it like I was all those years ago. And it's a wonderful, rewarding place to be in giving that back in that way.
The tools are the street learning that we did, you know.
And you know, sometimes formal institutions do not reinforce the idea of creating your own path forward. It's so structured, it's so by the book, there's no room for us to explore and understand what we have inside us. Jazz helps us to do that in a different way than European classical music does, to embrace the unknown, to go for something in another kind of way that allows our own sense of what is important to us to come forward in the music that we create. But it's time that we understand both sides of that. It's not either or. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be all of it. And as Black folks, we have to do that. We've been doing that, but in certain circumstances, it was frowned upon. And now we know we don't have to go down that road. We can seek other kind of knowledge and truth and bring that to our experience in a way that elevates what we do and how we go for it.
You know, I was thinking that, you know, just the conversations I've had with my father, or just to be in his presence when all of a sudden someone comes up that's not a jazz musician. For instance, the double quartet did a tour in Europe. It was in the summertime, and whenever we checked into a new hotel, they would put me in a room with him, thinking I was his wife. So I always had to wait in the lobby for a room. And this one particular time, we were in the south of Italy, this gorgeous hotel, and he was waiting with me because it was like, yes, yet again, you know. So we're just standing there talking, and it was a huge lobby. And I remember on the other side of the lobby, someone was yelling, Max, Max, to get his attention, Max. And it was Pavarotti. And he, you know, they came up and they embraced my father, said, hey, man, how you doing? And I'm standing there, my mouth is, you know, on the floor. He told my father while he was there, and my father told him while he was there, and that he's waiting with his daughter. I met Pavarotti. He was gracious, and he was checking out, and he gave me his suite. He went to the desk, and he said, give her my suite. I was waiting for just a room. And that's not the first time it's happened to my father. My father he appreciated masters across the board. Masters appreciated him. You know, I witnessed it all the time. He was a curator of some kind of summer jazz festival in the northern part of Italy. When he's walking down the street one day, and he's telling us, and then someone's calling him, Max, man, it was Leontine Price. And she was like there for the summer, and she invited him over. She said, Maxine, she made me some fried chicken and greens in Italy.
In Italy.
Yeah. I mean, and she,
That's
on the
incredible.
street, just screaming at him on the street, Max. The blessing to know that masters respect masters is the way we should be teaching our kids. Because the way classical music, some of it is taught, doesn't make any sense to me. You know, you don't know it when you're in it, but when you're practicing scales, jazz musicians practice scales. They practice all the scales on the lowest common note. So you hear it in all the modes. When I was in conservatory, if I wanted to play C major and then go to F major, I had to shift up and start there. It was about a physical thing instead of an oral thing. And this works better for your fingers than you're just trying to think of, you know, I got to go up here. You know, so you start on C, but you play F major. There's a very distinguished violinist who was in the Philharmonic for years, Sanford Allen, black guy. But he had master classes with Heifetz back in the day. And Sanford he was a fabulous violinist. And he heard the string quartet. He sat me down after he heard the string quartet. He said, I have to tell you, back in the day, he played for Heifetz. And he's playing this guy. And he said, you know what Heifetz said to me? He said, play me a G major scale starting on F. And he said, I couldn't do it. But that's how music is written. Why don't we play it that way? Why don't we study it that way? So that kind of mastery of scales and technical stuff is greatly appreciated with masters. It's like when they did the Grammys in New York. A friend of mine was playing it, and Pavarotti came to sing Nessun Dorma. And at the Grammys, who sings Nessun Dorma but Aretha Franklin? And Aretha Franklin was asked to sing Nessun Dorma, and she knew she was going to sing it. Pavarotti didn't say anything to anybody, but he had said, I want you to sing it, because she loved opera, and she studied remotely back in the day at Juilliard. So she knew it, and she came out and she sang in the same key. And she was eviscerated for it. But I tell you something, the next day when I got on the train to go to work with my viola, I'm sitting on the train, and there were a whole bunch of young black folks who watched that Grammys, and they said, I could hear them saying, what was that song that Aretha was singing? Boy, that was really nice. What was she singing? You know what I mean? The exposure needs to be there. Instead of this, I can go on, but I won't.
I could join you with that. It's, it's just crazy, this classical music exceptionalism. But I love these stories of real respect, of Max
Oh,
and
yeah.
Pavarotti and Marion and Leontine's Fried Chicken, and this is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, and
Incredible.
my father called me up and said, "I went to hear Wozzeck last night." And I'm like, "What is that?" I didn't even know what it was. It was one of his favorite operas, you know?
Mm.
Or I learned more about one sentence my father said about Puccini than I had learned in college. And he said, "Well, he was a painter." Oh, yeah. And he must have been thinking like that when he put all those colors in those different, you know what I
Yes.
mean? So that would have, I mean, it takes you right there. It takes you right
Yes.
there, you know? So there's this, and I just, my passion is that kids could just learn this way, and know that, okay, you can appreciate singing here with a mic, but go to the Met and sing over that orchestra and you sitting up here? Come on, that's Olympic.
Mm.
How would you say, as Black women, can we really lay the groundwork for future generations? The little Black girls who are just picking up an instrument, the young Black women who are starting college, the young women who are, stepping into their professional career. Do you have anything for them, for me, when it comes to the next generations of these musicians?
I would say it reminds me of a time in my life when I spent a year in Switzerland studying and touring as a classical violist. And we had coaches there, and one of the coaches was William Primrose. And the day he came, everyone was like waiting for him because he was like Casals, on the viola. And the day went by, like no one had seen him, and it was about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening when they realized he was sitting in the cafeteria in some chino jeans and just regular looking guy, plaid shirt, and just was a really down to earth kind of guy. I had the opportunity to play for him, and the only thing he said to me was I had to wear my heart on my sleeve when I played. That's the only thing he said to me, and it's just decades later. I'm thinking about what does that mean? And finally, I think I do have the answer. And it has to do with what Diane just said, a little bit of what Lesa just said, and a little bit of what I said. You have to show them who you are, regardless of the technique that you have. Classical pedagogy is the best when you're playing a string instrument. It's up to you what you're going to do with it, to put your heart on your sleeve. So it's like conquering the technique to be who you are. And I think that's why masters recognize masters, because it's the human condition that you want to express with that talent you have. So you have to accept the classical pedagogy, but you don't have to be prejudiced. You don't have to take on their bigotry, because when I was in Switzerland, I played for Paul Doctor. I played the second movement of the Schubert Arpeggio. And he said, well, I read this article in Scientific American about the difference between black and white hands. That's what he said to me. And I was like, here I am in the studio looking at the Alps. This man is talking about the reason he didn't like the way I played the arpeggio is because I had black hands. That's not telling me anything. That's not telling me anything. As opposed to decades later, when my father has asked me, after I graduate from college, I'm doing this concert at St. John of Divine. And the last piece is going to be Duke Ellington's Come Sunday, right? Mahale used to sing that all the time. He said, but I'm going to start with you playing, just play chorus, Maxine. And then the quartet will come in, and then the dancers will come in. Just play one chorus, and it's going to grow. In the St. John of Divine, which is a huge cathedral in New York, right? So he's thinking about how large it can get. All right, the quartet, then the dancers, then the choir is going to come in, and then the big organ is going to come in, right? But I only want you to play one chorus. I said, okay, all right. So when I got the beat sheet, and I learned the melody. He said, learn the melody. Okay. Comes the rehearsal. Everyone's there. All right. let's start. I play my chorus, and the choir is like, oh, it's beautiful. That was just gorgeous, you know. And then at the break, I could see my father is getting like really angry. And he said, you know, I don't know if you've been to the cathedral, but they have little booths on the side you can go pray in and whatnot. He said, come in here with me. You know, it took me. And he was like, you know, when he got angry, his lips would be like that kind of anger. You know, he was really angry. And he just took me in this room and he said, I told you to learn the melody. And I said, I did. He said, no, you didn't. And he went and he found a piece of paper and a pen and sat down. And he said, Lord, dear Lord above, comma, stop playing. I didn't learn the words. And I was like, Dad, I'm a classical musician. It was like the most impactful lesson I've ever had. Because even though classical music doesn't have, you have to put the words there. You have to put your words there, you know. You know, you listen to Leontine. I mean, you know, come on. She was a classical musician, but it was her, you know. I remember listening back in the day, listening to Johnny Carson one night. I happened to listen, you know, and she was on the show. And he asked her who her favorite singer was. She said Aretha Franklin. You know, and so he was so shocked. They didn't pursue it. You know, but then again, I mean, it's about the human condition. But you must learn the language and then put yourself into it. And don't let them tell you how to do it.
I believe you all are doing it. You're doing it with this interview.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've never had the opportunity to be interviewed like this, with
A lot smarter than we were.
Young visionaries. Yeah. I mean, you're already on that path. So I say just keep going, keep doing it, and exploring these horizons and bringing the information and the knowledge forward in this unique way.
History is so important to relay to our children and our students and everything, really. And then just continuing to teach them how to integrate the history, you know, to be a part of the legacy, you know, and not apart from it. I know there's so many Black classical players nowadays who are apart from the legacy. They may be making headlines, perhaps, but they are still separate. And of course, it's a trend from out of the tradition to have to be separate in order to, you know, like to have to go over to that side in order to be real, in order to be validated and accepted by the crowd, you know, by the audience. So I believe that, you know, we have to know the history and stick to it.
Thank you all so much for joining us today on Black Music Scene.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Once again, my name is Lexi Lagon Holloway.
And I'm Deja Wilson. And we'll see you next time.
The Black Music Scene podcast was written and produced by David Norville. Special thanks goes to Deja Wilson and Lexi Lagon Holloway for hosting today's episode. The Black Orchestral Network is sponsored by the Gateways Music Festival and generously supported by the Mellon Foundation and the New York State Council on the Arts. The Black Music Scene podcast is a product of the Black Orchestral Network. where our mission is to cultivate community, lift our voices, and tell our stories. If you'd like to get involved and support the Black Orchestral Network, please visit blackorchestralnetwork.org. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.